Quarter 5. Modeling Land Registry Business Processes. Computerizing a Land Registry. The Land Registry is one of the few institutions in Trinidad and Tobago that few persons can claim to fully understand. It took me 6 months in a project to strengthen information management at the Registrar General's Department before I could speak with any confidence on what is going on here. In 2018, the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs in Trinidad and Tobago began a project primarily aimed at improving conditions for investment in Trinidad and Tobago by streamlining the property registration process. This was a veiled response to that ease of doing business score that had been floating around in international financial institutions. This project was financed through a loan facility funded by the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB. The Land Registry is really about making a collection of documentation on privately owned property in Trinidad and Tobago available to local and foreign investors in land parcels. This collection has also historical and cultural value that can be considered priceless. As part of the process of strengthening information management, the project sought to support the Registrar General's Department in making more of the content of the Land Registry available to all its users. In carrying out this objective, it had become necessary to conduct a comprehensive business analysis aimed at providing recommendations and guidelines for the introduction and management of an automated property business registration solution for the registry. I won the contract and began working in the ministry, interviewing staff and evaluating and producing work charts of the business processes within the registry operations. The complexities in land registration. Land registration in Trinidad and Tobago is a very complicated matter. There are 23 different laws relating to real property and the expression of interest in real property. My task was to support a construct that will express unambiguously the registration of rights in real property and personal property as reflected in law and not in any desired technological format. There were a couple of other complications involved here. First among these was the Act that established the tasks and scope of the Registrar General, Deputy Registrars General, and Assistant Registrars General. This Act defined 4 indexes that the registration process was required to keep. An index of deeds in the form of tongue books and country books, an index of probates of wills and letters of administration, an index of judgments, decrees, orders, and rules, and an index of memoranda of lispendence. The Act also required the Registrar General to make the contents of these indices and other documents within the Land Registry available to the public for searches and inspection. In addition to keeping these 4 required indexes, the law required that whenever a major action occurred that changed the status of the ownership rights of any parcel of land, that action must also be registered. Now consider this. There are 11 such recognizable actions, each requiring registration in order to become legally effective. These are court orders, allocation of state lands, discharges, placements in trusts, mortgages, new lands being brought under RPA, partitions of lands, transfer of ownership by sale or by gift, assent in wills, leases, and withdrawals or replacement of title certificates. Each of these 11 will require evidence, which may be in the form of other documentations on other parcels, and as such, they too would have to be registered. Then there were a wide range of litigations that usually arise out of conflicts of interests. These too had to be registered with the relevant connections in place. These included illegal occupation, inheritance and family disputes, property transactions and contracts, challenges to ownership, multiple sales, false certificates, expropriation action, boundary disputes, disputes over use, trespassing, rights of access and passage, and false transaction letters. The law also allowed for the Registrar General to present a case before a judge and to maintain an index of judgments, decrees, orders, and rules received from the judiciary and executed as such. By now, you should be getting the idea of how complex the structure becomes, and I was expected to make sense of it. Charting workflows. My involvement was far more than simply producing business flow charts for an institution whose business was so complexly defined. I felt the need to contribute to the ongoing effort to streamline the business part of the Land Registry. In the first instance, the Land Registry had a series of ad hoc practices that had become institutionalized over time. These processes were so fossilized that the staff operating them were not aware of the purpose of each required step. There were at most 3 persons who fully understood all this complexity. They were the Registrar General, the Deputy Registrar General, and the Assistant Registrar General. Between them, you are sure to find explanation for each step in this mosaic of registration of different types of items. I found myself going back and forth between the Registrar Generals and their staff so as to capture the convoluted processes and to express them in flowcharts. Once I sat down with a clerk who was describing her task as placing a red stamp on the applications. Then when they were returned to her desk, she would then place a blue stamp on them. The only way to unravel this was to produce a blank piece of paper and ask her to do both stamping so that I could see. It turned out that the red stamp was meant to accommodate the signature of the overseeing officer, and the blue stamp was to route it into the approval bin. At this time, the registry still operated 2 systems for registering property. The older system was the deeds registration, and the more updated system was organized under the new Real Properties Act, RPA. The RPA process was the least user-friendly. I produced 8 discussion papers to guide me in this process. They were more for my use, as no one in officialdom seemed interested in them. These discussion papers were on matters such as framework analysis, workflows, business improvements, technology options, data sharing, e-conveyancing, a roadmap, and technological updates. I even went as far as to produce an implementation horizon chart, which illustrated an interim strategy implementation approach to short, medium, and long-term horizon goals. These were all based on how information reports coming out of the registry were currently compiled and used. Of the 19 substantive reports generated within the system, 10 were currently generated manually. 9 were generated both manually and electronically. Similarly, of these 19 reports, only 5 were being shared in the public domain. An algorithmic framework. My framework for analyzing the Land Registry was algorithmic, meaning it strung together a set of otherwise random actions in order to discover the logic of their collective approach. I got the impression that even the members of the legal profession were not fully familiar with all the critical movements at the core of the Land Registry. This framework provided guidance to both process and procedure, and in so doing, highlighted the ease and difficulty of computerizing each component. The framework began with the internal system objectives, which are at the core of the Land Registry. These are structural, and they guide the schemata of registration of documents and instruments towards achieving the objective of legality and security. The core of this system, pictured below in yellow, included such activities as document reception, creating a catalog or an index, imaging the document, and storing and archiving the same. Most of these were required by law. If we were to automate these systems, we would have to preserve them as complete subsystems that will become useful as inputs into other operational processes. The procedures refer to the operations that facilitate a specific relationship between processes and the internal system objectives. For example, there were the generation of barcodes, the assignment of volume and folio identification, registration number, application fees that were due, the generation of application templates for database functionality, and user interface guides and electronic signatures. The processes were the work tasks designed to use the procedures to achieve the system objective. These were basically captured under the spectrum of execution management. This is where we were guided by standards and quality control guidelines. I identified these as the following: screening documents at the counter, journal and index book entries, verifying accuracy in scanned documents, data capture and data input into digital format, signatures to validate registration, reporting and correcting errors, inputting data from external sources, and exporting data to external sources. The functionary category was an arbitrary but necessary component. This is where the end purpose of the process defined the structure, nature, and time frame of the data. For instance, in title registration, the end purpose was to generate a title certificate. But in deed registration, the end purpose was to facilitate conveyance and produce a certified copy of the relevant deed. Looking into the future, there are other functions that may require a fit-for-purpose approach to the way the registrar's data is combined and delivered. These may include fraud detection, land policy implementation, and supporting what I called the social-political continuum of claims of land rights. Building out from these four core aspects, that is, systems, procedures, processes, and functions, we were able to place the sources of governance within the framework. These were statutory requirements, information management, private citizen demand, and institutional demand. What was fueling this governance? The statutory requirements were the fuel in land administration, land law, land policy, and information sharing policy. These were fueled by law. Information management was fueled by land policy, information sharing policy, cadastral maps, and land parcel identification. Private citizen demand was fueled by cadastral mapping, land parcel identification, land tenure security, and the land markets themselves. And the institutional demand was fueled by land tenure security, the land markets, land administration, and land law. Computerizing this complexity. It is easy to bring information technology into the heart of the land registry operations from the right side of our analytics as expressed above. Here, computing the land registry has a ready-made alliance with institutional support. We identified 5 registers outside of the land registry that had to feed data into the land registry. These were land use data registers that existed in the Ministry of Agriculture and in the public utilities, the cadastral register that came out of the survey department, the land book register that came out of the regional corporations and city councils, the property valuation register that came out of the commissioner of valuations, and the building and dwelling register that came out of town and country planning. To use computerized technology to address the diverse needs on the left side of our framework was a totally different matter. The use of digital displays of land parcels would be extremely important, but you see the left side is a very expansive field. The following chart on the previous page showed the expansive uses that would be made of organized land parcel information. These pieces of information would be used by local governance fiscal responsibilities, land use classifications, geological patterns of concern, resettlement areas, wildlife habitat security, disease management profiles, historic archaeological sites, fire-prone zones, floodplain mapping network, credit management systems, electoral boundaries, police dispatching coverage, public utilities network, the regional health facilities, and the transportation network. These all combine to show us why we could not buy an off-the-shelf IT system and expect it to make the business functions in the land registry run more smoothly. Neither can we expect IT experts to simply redesign a system they had applied in Africa to fit the system requirements here in Trinidad and Tobago. There's another factor of concern to me, and it was this. Statistics quoted elsewhere suggested that about 30% of the occupied land parcels in Trinidad and Tobago were not registered. This was reflecting an apparent never-ending struggle, la luta continua, of persons occupying land while seeking to move from their concept of legitimacy to the state's concept of legality. I represented this as a social-political continuum of land rights claims and expressed it in a following picture. In this struggle, we had persons on the top side of the chart who were assuming land tenure through land capture, adverse possession, settlement schemes, and hopefully leases. The state was trying to counter these actions by measures on the lower side of the chart, such as notification of illegal occupation, then anti-eviction guarantees if you complied with the law, regularizing group tenure, and registering leasehold lands. History teaches us that in this conflict, legitimacy usually succeeds in transforming itself into legality. Thus, as legality is achieved in the registration of land rights claims, any mechanism used by the land registry to communicate to stakeholders and customers must be concerned with synchronizing the security of tenure as a private goal of the individual citizen and the registration of ownership rights as the public goal of the state. Parting with grace. I ended up producing 14 flowcharts, but left the position before my assignment was completed because of some disturbing trends. First, the French team, which was contracted to computerize the registry, was slow in getting off the ground. When I finally encountered them and began to share my business charts with them, they informed the project manager that these charts were of little use. Now, the only way an information system company can tell you that the work charts you produce are useless is if their intention is to have you adopt their ready-made system and modify your business processes to fit within. Since the project manager was prone to accept their complaints as being legitimate, I felt no compunction to continue under this false pretense of creating a unique path to computerizing our land registry. I respectfully opted to leave. I think there is enough information in my report for the Land Registry to mount a public relations campaign to inform the user public of its functions and services.